I'd like to start off by asking the Director, you have a wide range of experience. You were Director of FEMA, you were National Campaign Manager for Bush Cheney 2000, you were on the Homeland Security Advisory Council, you have business experience, wide range of experience. And of course you hail from a farm west of Blackwell, so in some sense you're coming home, but I want to ask you if who was the first one to contact you about this job, and why did you accept the offer?
Well, let me start by thanking everybody for showing up tonight. Because of the lights, I cannot see directly into your face or your eyes, and I like to make that eye contact. But apparently somebody wants to see this either streaming at some point or on television, so I'll just have to suck it up and make it through the evening. I believe we all exist here for a reason, a purpose, and that becomes clearer and clearer to me as I mature in age. My wife might have a different definition of mature for me, but we all get older and things seem to sink in now and then. I've been very, very fortunate to do a lot of things all over the world and work for some wonderful people. And Diane and I have been living in Austin, Texas for the past 22 years, except for a short jaunt to Washington for 2 years, 13 days, but who's counting? During the days of FEMA, 9/11, and everything else that followed. I left the agency there the day that Homeland Security was created because I didn't think Homeland Security was what our country needed, and so I returned to the private sector. Watching Oklahoma from afar for a number of years, mainly because it's my home. My wife grew up here in Oklahoma City. Graduated Putnam City, did her undergraduate at Cameron, at Lawton, and then went to OU Law School and graduated. I, on the other hand, was very lucky to make it 60 miles away from Blackwell and attend Oklahoma State University. They were very happy when I was leaving. Enough said about that. But watching the developments in corrections and seeing all the media and the hyperbole about the correctional system in Oklahoma, I called a friend of mine who I got to know at Oklahoma State University while we were there, and his dad used to be the chairman of the Board of Corrections many years ago. And I said, Will, the governor has an issue in front of her, in for some tough sledding, has been tough sledding, and if she's interested in someone who won't be a caretaker but come in and make things happen, she ought to give me a call. I've known Mary Fallon for almost 40 years, and I didn't think it was appropriate for me to call her directly. So 10 minutes after that conversation, the governor of the state of Oklahoma gave me a call on my cell phone. And we talked for a while, and I expressed my interest, and I said, I know you have a board, and I'm not the type of individual to be a caretaker of anything. In my world, there are talkers and doers, and I try to associate myself with doers, and DOC needs a doer at the helm to see if we can right a listing ship. Not that we have much control over who comes into the assessment and receiving center down at Lexington, but hopefully I might be able to help spark a more general discussion in the legislature and with the governor to have a broader bite at the apple on criminal justice reform. And a few days later, the chairman of the board, Kevin Gross from Tulsa, called me and said, can you come up and swing by and let us talk? And it worked out, and they voted to appoint me interim on sometime in January, and I started January 8th, and today is my 96th day on the job. So there you have it.
You have no corrections experience in your background. Why would you want to take this system on?
Well, when I went to Texas 22 years ago, ended up running the governor's campaign, and then Governor Bush appointed me as his chief of staff, and one of the things he ran on was criminal justice reform. We had a huge problem with TDCJ in Texas, and here we are 22 years later, and I feel like, as Yogi would say, a deja vu all over again. The parallels between where Texas was 22 years ago and where Oklahoma is today are absolutely uncanny to me. So I'm a manager. I make things happen, and I think Oklahoma is very fortunate to have quite a large number of correction officials, correctional experts, that what the agency, in my opinion, needed at the time was a fresh set of eyes and someone who was willing not to be a caretaker and to help the professionals do the job they're hired to do.
You think
so coupled, just to wrap this up, just coupled with my experience of bird dogging TDCJ while I was in Texas. I was his chief of staff for 5 years. That was the one agency I had to take care of outside of my regular duties as the chief, and then helped shepherd the 2 bites of the apple on criminal justice reform in Texas in the 95 session and the 97 session. That was the groundwork for Texas to where it is today after their 2006 session or attempt to change the criminal justice code, and it's led Texas to a point where they are closing prisons today and their population has receded, incarceration down significantly. So I'm hoping that we can have the same collective impact here in Oklahoma. And I know the governor has put forth a State of the State address, 4 or 5 ideas, and those are making its way through the legislative process right now, and it's a start.
Shortly after arriving, you began touring the facilities.
Yeah, I did.
In the Department of Corrections. Can you describe some of the highlights of what you saw and what your assessment of the overall system is and the operation?
It's ugly. You see TV shows and movies that try to portray prison life, and none of it does it justice. It's really rough inside the facilities. They're ancient facilities. A lot of them are in total disrepair. Our 2 major facilities at McAllister, Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and the other one at Granite, Oklahoma State Reformatory, are well over 100 years old, in desperate need of repair, attention. Our maintenance list has evolved over the years from deferred maintenance to ignored maintenance because there's not enough money to take care of it. Our capital needs in the system are in excess of $750 million. Well, that's just not going to happen in today's world with a budget crunch. So it's up to us to help try to solve our own overcrowding problem, where we're at 122% of capacity right now. And there are facilities that need to be closed, and we need to have a frank conversation, open conversation about that. There are facilities that are in pretty good shape, but still need attention. Our funding at the agency has been flat in appropriated dollars for over 10 years. And the game plan has been by the legislature to fund about 3/4 of the budget and then always start the next annual session with a supplemental budget to help fill out the rest of the current fiscal year. Right now, we're at a $38 million shortfall, but as we all know, a couple of weeks ago, the governor moved, and with House and Senate agreement on education and prisons, they tapped the rainy day fund for $27.6 million for Department of Corrections. That number is short of the 38, so yes, I have to work harder between now and July 1 to fill that hole. But the 27.6 is deriven from state law that says when there is a revenue failure, the legislature and the governor can only tap the rainy day fund for the amount of the failure. So the first failure was a 3% cut to the agency. Second failure was 4% cut to the agency, and that equates to the $27.6 million that they gave the agency, and I'm grateful for that attention. Our needs are unbelievable.
Do you know why was there a shortfall, 27-something million dollars, and now 38? What happened? Perhaps before you even arrived, why did we fall short?
Well, the population keeps growing, and there's no place to put people. So we have almost 60,000 people in our system. It's a shocking number. It's 59 and some change. Half that population is incarcerated in facilities, whether they're halfway houses, work release centers, one of our main 17 facilities, and then we have 3 private prisons. We contract for beds, we lease beds, and the taxpayer pays a premium for those beds because those private prisons are for-profit entities. I don't particularly like private prisons. I mean, it's okay that they're in business, but I believe that if someone breaks the law in Oklahoma, it's the responsibility of the Oklahoma State government to house those people who need to be incarcerated. So, but I'm glad in this particular instance we have access to almost 6,000 beds in those 3 facilities that we can contract. Otherwise, we would be letting people out that shouldn't be out on the streets. Which begs the question, what's the makeup of the population? Half our population are nonviolent offenders. Half our population are first, second, third time offenders on drug and alcohol related issues. We ought to be taking those 2 groups and putting them in programs that would be local and more efficient, less costly, and closer to their families and support groups, instead of shipping them all over the state, putting them in with hardened criminals. We only have about 1,800 correctional officers. These are men and women that allegedly are trained to take care of our population. It's actually less than 1,800 now. Our target includes about another 500 to 600 correctional officers that we need. But if you have 30,000 incarcerated and you have 1,798 correctional officers, you can see the odds are not in your favor. It is through the grace of God that the gangs and the prison population allow our men and women to go home every night.
But you're at 122% over capacity.
That's correct.
How do you make that work? I mean, we've seen the stories about they're in bunk beds, they're in gymnasiums. Why is this permitted? Why don't the fire marshal step in and say this is?
Well, the fire marshal does on a regular basis.
That's okay. They passed off.
No. It's not okay. It's not okay. We before we can increase the capacity, we have to sit with the fire marshal and absolutely show the design, the layout of where we're going to put the additional beds. I don't like it, but I have no control who comes into the system. And sometimes the fire marshal says, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. The reason we're allowed to do that in some cases is that we're taking program space. This is how we shoot ourselves in the other foot. We take program space away from those programs that the men and women incarcerated absolutely need. A lot of our population has no training, no education, so programs are things to better themselves, so when they return to society, they become a credit to society, not a debit to society. When we give up the program space, there's no place for the programs to continue. So in a lot of cases, in a lot of facilities, the program space is sacrificed to put bunk beds to make room for people who are showing up at Lexington that, once again, we have no control over who comes into the system. That's how we got to where we are. The Criminal Justice Code, that's where we are right now, I should say. The Criminal Justice Code in Oklahoma is the engineer of the train driving that train to what has brought us to this point now. The 85% laws, the 50% laws, the mandatory sentences have not had the desired effect that everyone was expecting. So when men and women come into our system, regrettably, because we cannot protect each and every one of them, they join a gang. And they join a gang for protection, whether it's the Irish Mob, the Indian Brotherhood, Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican group. I mean, we have more gangs than you can shake a stick at. And in an ideal world, we love to segregate the gangs, but we don't have that capability.
Is there any concern in the department or at the state levels that someone will sue the Corrections Department in the state of Oklahoma and try to force a consent decree in which the feds would come in and take over the system? You hear this rumor every once in a while, but...
Right. There's always a concern of that. The problem is I have to do something about it, which is why I asked the board for permission last Thursday at our board meeting for us to do a review and see what's available insofar as additional bed space throughout the state. It's cost prohibitive to send folks out of state and incarcerate them somewhere else. It's almost cost prohibitive to put them in private facilities, but we really don't have a choice. What I do know is there happens to be a couple of facilities that are privately owned out west, Watonga and Sayre, and I've started discussions with the entity that owns those facilities not to lease any more beds because we can't afford that. But if I can make the math work, and it doesn't matter whether it's the old math or the new math, math is math, I think that I can close X number of facilities and consolidate a portion of our population to a point where taxpayers aren't continually throwing good money after bad money. And the way we would do that, we would lease the building. This is just an idea. Lease the building if they would agree to that, and we would operate it with our own personnel to our own protocols and procedures in a much more cost-efficient way than leasing the beds. Private prisons are not the end-all, be-all, or be-all, end-all of the correctional industry, but they are a staple that's here. We represent, unfortunately, the ugly underside of society, and nobody really wants to talk about it. And they sure as hell don't want to fund it. So we're kind of in that proverbial we woke a switch.
There are concerns. Private prisons, of course, are looking to make a profit, and
They do make a profit.
shortchange on services. But if you're able to go in, I guess the thinking is they might allow you to go in and run them because they're just they have empty buildings, and they need revenue, some revenue stream from them. But
Well, I understand that. The one in Watonga, which is known as Diamondback, has been empty since 2010. So they're really sucking air on that mortgage payment. The one in Sayre, which closed December 31st, had been utilized by the California Department of Corrections for a number of years. The largest facility we utilize right now belongs to GEO, an outfit called GEO, and they run a 2,600 bed facility in Lawton. They're wanting to build and add on, but that's just not cost efficient for the state. We have a lot of facilities that it costs way too much money for us to operate, and those facilities need to be put out of their misery. I'm just calling them as I see them, folks, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but as taxpayers, I strongly believe you have a dog in this fight. And it's not a fight, it's a discussion. But we need to figure out a way to spend our money more wisely, coupled with the fact that next legislative session, I am hopeful that there'll be a comprehensive criminal justice plan that can be addressed by the legislature. We're a little late in this session to take that up. They have bigger issues right now to fill the FY17 budget, so I don't envy the members one bit, but they're elected officials and it's a part of their job to make the tough decisions.
about 6 years ago, there was a needs assessment, and I think a suggestion that we could build a new prison. If we were to build, say, replace the penitentiary with a more efficient facility, you would save enough money each year to be able to pay off the bonds issued to build that facility. So any sign that that consideration is on the table?
Early on, about day 3 or 4 for me, I met with numerous legislators, and they had talked about bonding for that very reason, but with the onset of the second revenue failure, that discussion fell by the wayside, and I understand why. That would be, long term, that would be the smartest thing for us to do, is to build a super facility that's centrally located. Our transportation cost, just moving inmates around to get medical care, is absolutely astronomical. We have a transportation unit that operates out of Lexington. We have a couple of buses there. One of them has over 1 million miles on the bus. Now you can imagine what that maintenance bill is annually. We can't modernize our fleet, which causes problems insofar as the inmates and the safety of the correctional officers and the drivers, because we're not using the state-of-the-art transportation modes. Thankfully, because we have a cooperative agreement with the city of Lindsay and their hospital, the Lindsay Hospital is open and does a lot of DOC business for us. And I guess the biggest thanks should go to the OU Medical Center down the street here at 13th and Lincoln Boulevard. They see a lot of our folks. We have one dialysis center at the Joseph, it's not at the Joseph Harp. Is it at the Joseph Harp? I don't remember. No, it may be at the Lark. It doesn't matter. It's in Lexington. And that services the entire state population for dialysis, which is very difficult when you have an aging population as we have. We really have folks that are at one end of the age spectrum and the other end of the age spectrum. These young men that come in full of testosterone and other things sometimes are really difficult to handle. The biggest need in getting a facility is that we cannot manage our population properly. As I said earlier, our correctional officials know exactly what to do. They just can't do it because of the population growth. We net anywhere annually from 12 to 1,600 inmates a year. That's net. That's after everybody else has gone out the back door, they've served their time, paid their debt to society, and we discount those folks. You know, I don't know, we may have a turnover, I'm not sure what it is, but 8 to 12,000 people, and then we'll get all those people back, and I may be off on the numbers, but we get all those folks back plus an additional 12 to 1,600 people every year. So we're not gaining on the system. We're absolutely losing. And a lot of folks, as I travel around the state, they have a philosophy of lock them up and throw away the key. Well, that has a cost factor. That's a great strategy, but it has a cost factor to the taxpayer of the state. And there is not a way for us to continue getting dilapidated buildings and trying to fortify them to the point that they are ACA accredited to hold prisoners. Of the 17 major facilities in the state, only 7 of them were ever designed and built as a prison in the state of Oklahoma. Everything we now have added to the system has either been a boys' home, a girls' home, high school gym, an old armory, part of a mental health campus as it is at Fort Supply. It's been in operation at Fort Supply, the William S. Key facility, for 25 years or so, and only this past January, this year, did we get enough money to put up a perimeter fence. Well, in prisons, fences are important. So we look at our walkaways and we go, well, why do we have so many walkaways at William S. Key, Fort Supply? It's because there isn't a fence. Now, most of those folks would like to call them escapees, but they end up coming back. We either know where they live, they know where their mom lives, they want to go home for a hot meal, or to have their laundry done, or whatever reason, or to see their girlfriend. But they always end up returning to our system.
I'd like to open up for questions here from the audience.
This is the dangerous part. Everybody's hand goes, okay, maybe not.
Yes, over here.
Thank you for coming. Bo Cox from Norman.
Botox in Norman?
Yes, sir.
Botox.
Botox. If you say it real fast, it sounds like Botox. It's Bo Cox, B-O-C-O-X. Norman, Oklahoma. About 20 years ago, then Governor Frank Keating brought in a private auditor to look at our corrections department and came away with the recommendation that they retool the classification system, which at that time had incentives built in for good behavior, for people to work their way down and to be able to finally be at better positions to return to the community after serving long sentences.
Right.
This recommendation said that we need to retool it, and all of a sudden we had this huge bottleneck in medium security level, which not coincidentally was where private prisons were going to come in and have them filled. What plans are there to undo this process to where people can actually work their way toward actual release and work their way down as they serve time? And there's a second part to this, because in doing so, we began in Oklahoma talking about prisoners either being violent or nonviolent based on the crime they were convicted of. When what we know in science and best practices is that there's an awful lot of better risk assessment tools that are available for professional corrections people to use in determining people's future behavior. And simply saying because somebody was convicted of a violent crime or nonviolent crime is just one little domain in a multifaceted formula.
Okay.
Well, let me start responding to that by showing this. I don't know that everybody can see this, but this is a paper file. It is a closed file. It's called a consolidated record card. This is a closed file, and this is one of the thin ones that we have in storage. The state 20 years ago invested a lot of money in a software program. Software program was 10 years old at the time that they purchased it, so it's now 30 years old. It is so unreliable that we have to rely on exactly the same system that we had when we were a territory. And a lot of people find that hard to believe. Here we are in the 20th century. We're not even in the 20th century. It is a sad commentary on the way we do business. We're trying to upgrade that software. I met with the current vendor on that last week. I think we can find a way forward. But what happens is wherever an individual goes in our system, this consolidated record file follows them. And you would not be surprised the number of emails we get blasted throughout the system. Have you seen David Fritzy's CRC? Because David Fritzy, who is not sure where he's going or what he's doing, not sure when the last time he saw his caseworker, who might have this, his life is frozen. He cannot move forward or backwards. He is on a merry-go-round building up time. So, this is what we rely upon to keep track of the credits, their education, their vocational training, any and everything. Their life history is right here. So, when the 85% law was passed, there was some confusion about, and still is, I might add, about the ability to earn credits. The governor, and this predates me, but I think last fall issued an executive order or an executive memorandum to instruct the Department of Correction Board to start awarding credits prior to 85% of their incarceration.
Yes.
And thankfully, that has worked. It's going to take a while to work through the system. But men and women are now accruing credits if they behave themselves to the point that those credits will click in when they hit 85%, as opposed to waiting till they're at 85% of their term and then start adding credits. We're trying to do any and everything we possibly can do to alleviate our overcrowding situation. The ability of men and women to earn credits is a part of that strategy. It'll be a while before that adds up, but I'm thankful that the governor took that step. And I know there are folks in the legislature and the AG's office that disagree somewhat, but there is no incentive for a person who's serving 20 years and he has to serve 85% of that 20 years to behave until he reaches 85% if there is not a way to achieve some kind of credit, whether it's his education, whether it's a vocational need, or some of these folks have graduate degrees, undergraduate degrees and graduate degrees, and they want to continue their education so they'd have something specific to do when they leave prison. We are trying to unstop that cork in the bottle. The folks that do this live in Lexington. They're with classification and population, and they really work hard at making sure everything in the file is correct, making sure that time owed to the state is absolutely correct, because we expose ourselves to keeping someone too long, that causes a lawsuit, or we let someone out too early and then they go out and commit a heinous act. So we're exposed at both ends. The answer to this is getting a software system, yes, here in the 21st century, that we can use that will better manage our population, which is tied back into being able to separate the different classifications in the system, as opposed to we have maximums in with mediums, mediums in with minimums. They're all overrides. In other words, our population is not holistic when it comes to the classification of men and women. And it's because of the pressure put on the system by all these crimes that folks have committed, and the DAs and judges are doing their job. I understand that. There isn't anybody tougher on crime than myself. But at some point, we have to be realistic, the amount of money we can spend to incarcerate some people who should not be incarcerated. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's a lot of folks out there, David, that need to be incarcerated. And we've got them at McAllister and a couple of other facilities. They will never get out. They're locked down 23 hours a day.
Yeah.
And 1 hour of exercise outside, and not that itself is not a healthy situation, but they're bad characters, and they need to be locked down.
We have a question in the
I don't
center
know if that
here.
answered your question, but at least puts us on the right glide path if we can address that. Do you work for the department?
No, I work for the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse.
Okay.
I was in the Department of Corrections for 17 years.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm a convicted murderer. I'm a first-degree murderer. I'm one of those guys that probably on paper, if you look at, shouldn't be out.
No.
I've been out paying taxes. I work. I help people. And
Well, we
I
thank.
think this inability to look at people as people, the people, you talk about people being locked down in McAllister for 23 hours a day. Some of those guys are people that have made some really bad choices. But saying people should never get out is not an answer to this problem either.
Well, I mean,
I would be one of those people.
Yeah.
you're singing my song. I
Thank
mean,
you.
That's exactly what I've been talking about.
What's your question here in the center?
Thank you, Director. My name is Jackie Schweitzer. I'm with Oklahoma Corrections.
Can you
Can you
Speak up a
speak
little.
up? Oh,
Sorry. My name is Jackie Schweitzer. I'm with Oklahoma Corrections Professionals. My question relates to the stigma that some officers and staff face who have certain differing levels of higher education. The question is, are you aware of this issue? And if so, is there any kind of plan in place to try to change that culture?
I'm not understanding the question. Can you?
Can you boil that to just a really quick, concise question?
Yes, sir.
Speak loud.
As a representative with this association, I represent
Yes.
officers and staff
I
within
understand.
the Department of Corrections.
Art, what's
I've
the
had-
question?
Officers who have college degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees,
Right.
many of them have come to me and, even from personal experience, have told me that they face basically a stigma while working in the department. Is there any plan in place to possibly change this culture?
I'm just worried about making your payroll to begin with. I hate to be so blunt, but one thing we've been able to achieve is through the $27.5 million, there will be no furloughs or layoffs this year. So that's number one on my agenda. Number two, I have not heard about this. Number three, tomorrow I'm meeting with Gus Blackwell and representatives of your organization. Maybe you're in the meeting to talk about a variety of issues. So, but no one's ever brought this to my attention. I'll sure bring it up at the meeting tomorrow. It's at 1:30. So,
Let me follow up with a question. What do you think the morale is of your correctional officers?
not good. It's not good anywhere in the system. It's not where I would like it to be. Folks don't have pride in their facilities, so it's very difficult to have pride in the job that they do. They're fortunate. Hey, Representative Cleveland, you're hiding behind the bright lights. They work incredible hours. We're understaffed. Vast part of our system works 12-hour shifts. They get home, they lay down, and then they're called to come back again for another 12 hours. I'm trying to hire as many correctional officers and train them properly as I possibly can. The vast majority of the system has not had a pay raise in over 11 years. So we have some folks. 2 years ago, the legislature did make a move to address correctional officers, food handlers, and a couple of other classifications, a couple of other classes within the classified arena, but in some cases we may be sitting side by side at work and you got a pay raise and I didn't. How do you think that's going to affect morale? It's a problem. It's a serious problem. I would love to improve the work environment. Thank you for arranging the train, by the way.
My pleasure.
It is a goal of mine, but it is a collective effort. One person can't do it, so that's one of the reasons I make these visits to facilities. I think I've made about half of them so far out of the 67 footprints that we have. And it's important for me to be walking the line and out in the yard. It's a good way for me to figure out the temperature of the population. Plus, I am able to talk to any and all correctional officers. And I keep telling them that if I don't know about these issues, if something's broken, I can't help you fix them. Just like this issue back here that you had. It's the first time I've heard about that, so I'll get it addressed tomorrow. I can only do so much, and I'm trying to do as much as I possibly can because I am the interim. I mean, the board may fire me tomorrow. They may fire me. Legislature may fire me. They're still in town, so anything is possible.
You want to stay in for the long haul?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see. That's up to the board
Okay.
and my wife.
Question here.
Yes, Lynn Powell from Tulsa. And you talk about having a lot of older inmates that cost you a lot of money with medical care and everything.
Yes, ma'am.
But a lot of these are lifers that have done 25, 30 years or more and have earned a second chance maybe outside if they could just make parole. And you would save money if the older population was looked at by on your medical cost?
I don't disagree with you, Lynn, not one bit. And we do not have that ability at DOC to pardon or parole or commute any sentences. That responsibility resides with the Pardon and Parole Board. They have a tough duty, and we're trying to improve our relationship and education insofar as the numbers and the incarceration rate. But when you get 40 and over in our population, you lose your testosterone, you lose your ability to be drawn into gang violence, and the population does become easier to handle. I think the department years ago made a decision to change Granite, the OSR, to an over 40 population, and that has helped tremendously. Granite used to be known in our system as a place for gladiator school. People, and not inmates, but convicts who are proud of that name, would work the system in such that they would end up at OSR at Granite to participate in gladiator school. And admittedly, that was somewhat our fault for allowing that to happen. It's stopped now. It's not going on anywhere in the system. We do have fights that break out, but most of those are gang related. But all in all, given the odds that face our correctional officers, they do a pretty cotton picking good job with what they have.
We have a question here toward the back.
Pat McGuigan, Mr. Allbaugh, has the turmoil surrounding the death penalty process impacted morale from your perspective within the agency, and for that matter, public confidence in the agency? And the tough one, do you believe there will be any indictments as a result of the current multi-county grand jury?
Pat, I have no idea when the grand jury's going to issue their report. I have no insight into what they've been talking about, nor do I have any idea if anybody's going to be indicted. But my gut tells me no. I mean, and I'm trying to find the there's there. Yes, there were mistakes made, but it's not any different than any other human error. We didn't have the systems of checking, double checking, and triple checking medications. All of those processes and procedures have been totally rewritten. That even started before I showed up in January, and I have reviewed those and added some additional procedures that have to take place to ensure our ability that these mistakes will not ever be replicated. We practice every month this all-volunteer execution team. Folks know one another on the team, but nobody knows who they are in the system, and that's the way it ought to be.
Director, I wanted to follow up with so much trouble with executions today, even getting the drugs. Are you in favor of the death penalty in terms of being able to carry it out
I am.
in a professional and humane way?
I am totally confident that what we have put in place today is the right approach as long as Oklahoma is going to have the death penalty. I favor the death penalty. There are 5 who have exhausted their appeals right now. And whenever the report comes out, the grand jury's done with their business. I understand they're in town yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Who knows what's going to happen? But even when they issue their report, the Attorney General, maybe rightly so, has issued a 150-day buffer period. So that's 5 months. And others will exhaust their appeals. We're probably looking at early fall before we restart, if we're allowed to restart. I have to commend the legislature because in the last couple of days they have taken steps to give us the authority to apply for the necessary drug license, thank you, Bobby, to have and store those drugs on site and warehouse them properly for upcoming executions. But if I wasn't sure that we could do this right, we wouldn't be moving forward. But I am confident based upon the exercise. And we practice different scenarios every time. We just don't run through the same. And I'm getting into the weeds here that really isn't appetizing, but
We have a question over
he
here.
ended up there.
Oh, okay.
Where are we?
Right here.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate the question.
Right here. Hi, my name's David Hall. I was wondering, I'm actually a former foster youth out of the state of Oklahoma. The state of Oklahoma, whenever youth age out of care, upwards of 70% will actually go to jail by the age of 21. Because of that, obviously, we're being that about 300 or so age out every single year. We're possibly looking at about 200 kids every single year going into incarceration, regardless of even the amount of time. So what exactly are we maybe looking at as far as preventative measures with various organizations, nonprofits, maybe on the corrections side as far as advocacy to try to prevent that? Because we're looking at, we're already paying for foster parents and resources for the kids and whatnot, but we're only paying for that until 18, whereas now we're looking at, possibly paying for the next 50 years. And then with the fact that we already have 1 in 5 Oklahomans with felonies, that's creating even more issues as far as ability to get jobs, ability to have education, things like that. So what are we doing as preventative measures for that?
Thank you for your question. One of our most successful programs is called the RID program, and regrettably it doesn't address directly the aging out issue. I don't have a lot to say about the aging out issue. That's just the way the system is right now. That's not an acceptable answer, and that's a part of why the entire criminal justice and juvenile justice code needs to be addressed, so it makes some sense. We're on a huge cycle. Let me speak, for example, meth houses in Oklahoma. Oftentimes, the women that are involved get hooked up with a boyfriend or a husband, and he's actually the one doing the meth house, but because she lives in the house, they have a couple of kids, they both get busted, so they're in our system, and guess who's taking care of the kids? It's the state again. So we need to figure out how to interdict and take care of those kids in a proper way so they're not following their parents into those bunk beds. They're just, otherwise, the parents are just warehousing the beds until their kids come of age. The RID program in Alva at the Bill Johnson facility is one of the most successful programs that in a youth group, 18, it's couched as 18 to 40, but on my visitations, you can look at the age group and it's essentially 18 to 30. It's a 6-month program that really, and it's somewhat a boot camp atmosphere, but it works. It absolutely works. The aging out issue is there needs to be a safety net for you folks when you get out of the juvenile justice system. You can't, I know what happens. They go back to their old groups. They hang out with the same guys that they got in trouble with to begin with, and they're just going to repeat it, and because they're now over 18, they're going to live in a big house now, much more crowded house than you have at a juvenile facility. But this RID program is something we need to expand. What I'm concerned with right now, because of the crunch on the demand for bed space, that the full 6-month program is not able to take hold with these young men because we're trying to move them through the program at a much faster rate. And rightly or wrongly, we all have come to understand that the juvenile mind is not fully developed, and the earlier we can get to these kids and get them into the right kind of programs, because the way the home has deteriorated and their support groups, the better off we're all going to be. And there are a lot of volunteer groups throughout the state that come into our facilities, and whether it's a religious outreach program, a faith-based organization, or a career tech, or many other organizations that are all volunteer-based, what happens to us is that we have such a demand for those folks who want to come into the facility, we just can't accommodate all of them. And that hurts the inmates. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't hurt those volunteers that want to come in. It's just not having the space, because the space is also taken, where we would use those programs, taken by other beds. But I'm hoping that next year we can address the entire criminal and juvenile justice code to address this issue. That's about the best I can do right now, other than go out and preach as much. I hate preaching or speech fine, but...
There's a question here in the same direction.
Hello, Chief. My name is Sarah Bana. I am the Director of Civic Services Community Advocacy, a co-founder of the Ending Violence Everywhere Coalition, and an advocate for a more compassionate society. I am here today on behalf of some of my clients, some of those serving time currently in the Oklahoma correctional facilities, and others who are struggling with the re-entry under probation and parole services. My concern and my question to you is about the reentry system, which in my opinion is broken. Many of my clients fail to complete reentry and end up in jail altogether, all over again. And one of my concerns is the lack of dignity and respect shown to ex-convicts who've completed their time in jails. On a daily basis, I have really bad experiences at parole and probation offices where my clients are really, really treated less than human beings. And I wonder if under your leadership, some of the treatment of these ex-convicts who are trying to reconstruct their lives will change.
Well, I hope that's going to be the case. I've just started visiting parole and probation offices, and those aren't the most glamorous places to visit. But I do agree there needs to be an attitude adjustment, if that's polite. Right now, probation and parole, they're not given the direction, the supervision that they actually need from senior management, and I'm going to change that structure. I don't know how quickly I'm going to be able to do that. It probably won't won't help your immediate clients, but the idea is to fix a system for going forward. And you're absolutely right. Those folks who have paid their debt to society should not be reminded of that. Once the debt is paid to society, it's paid, and they need to be looking forward, and all of us on the outside need to be helping these folks as much as possible. Our reentry program is less than desirable. The halfway houses and some of our work release centers are pretty pitiful. So, and they don't have access to supporting programs. It's just a place, it becomes a place where they just tick off the days till they can rejoin society. I don't like it. I'm going to change it. And ma'am, I don't know where you are or where you're hiding, but maybe you're not hiding. There you are. I see you. If you, I'd like to have a conversation with you sometime, not about your clients, but about the approach, because I can't affect, my hands are tied when it comes to the time that is owed to the state by these inmates, and it is what it is. But there's no reason we can't treat them as human beings who have made a mistake. Who in this room hasn't made a mistake? Oftentimes I go to these facilities and say, there but for the grace of God go I.
Director,
You never know.
speaking of the debt, why is the state challenging the FCC ruling that would cap the phone charges often paid by inmates' families, spouses, parents, leaving them when they leave prison with contributing to the load of money that they often still pay?
Our phone rates are one of the lowest phone rates in the country. And I don't think it's right that the taxpayer once again is asked to shore the burden of the cost of the phone calls. We have an outside contractor. We do our best to make sure the phones work. It doesn't always work well, but we're trying to improve that with GTL. But that we just don't have the money to subsidize that program. It's non-existent. I'm doing pretty well to ensure that the lights are on, the staff is paid, they're fed 3 times a day, they get clothes and hygiene items. I mean, I'm dealing with the basic of basics right now, and most Oklahomans would be embarrassed if they actually understood how bad our correctional system is. There's a segment of society that really doesn't care. If they're a criminal for life. And I don't think that's the way we have evolved as humans. Yes, ma'am? Back there hiding.
Yes.
Hi, Director. My name is Donna Gregory, and I write grants for one of the nonprofit partners with DOC, who actually, we do reentry services and education, work readiness training. And as you know, anyone who writes grants, we live and die by correct information. That's what funders want to see. They want to see data, they want to see statistics. You've given some great statistics tonight. There used to be on the DOC website a monthly statistical page. Wow, that's loud. I'll talk louder. There used to be a monthly statistical fact sheet on the DOC website, and that has stopped. It makes grant writing and securing funding very difficult to not have access to current data. So I'd like to make a plug, and I really hate to ask anyone to increase their workload because I know you're understaffed and overworked and underpaid and everything, but that would be helpful. And if you could just clarify something you said, 1,200 to 1,600 net new inmates a year. I got that. But then you said 8,000 to 12,000 people plus an additional 12 to 1,600 a year. What's the 8,000 to 12,000?
Well, I need to double check those numbers. I'm not sure that that's what rolls out of the system, but annually, but that sticks in my mind. Plus, we get those folks, that number back, plus an additional 12 to 1,600 people. So whatever goes out the door for time served, we're getting that back plus the additional amount. That's what the point, whatever the amount is, we're still going to net 12 to 1,600 a year. Insofar as the The website, I do know the Communication Shops is working diligently to improve our website. They've had to take down numerous pages. We're using an outside contractor because we can't do it internally, unfortunately. We just don't have that capability nor manpower. And I think that may be why that page has disappeared. We try to be as transparent as possible with all of our numbers. There's nothing to hide. So I will ask those folks, what's up? I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. There she is right there.
Question here.
Okay,
My
thank
name is Ben Carnes, and I guess you could say I'm a former correctional consumer. I did about 7.5 years for a discharge when I was sentenced. I'm a pro. And I guess my question for you is, what do you know about other state systems that have a successful model, and what factors of that model could you apply here? And if there's problems in implementing those problems, what are they?
I didn't catch that. Can you enunciate that a little
Yes,
more?
I'm sorry. It's hard to hear.
I was asking, but what do you know about other states that have a successful correctional model? And I know each system has its own unique character.
Yeah.
So from those successful models, what can you adapt to the Oklahoma correctional system to help make it successful? And if there's problems from implementing that factor,
Right.
or there are political issues that keeps it from happening, legislative issues?
Which states would you see as models?
Well,
for
the
corrections?
one that I have the most experience with, obviously, is Texas. You know, they're approaching 30 million people, and their population is now down to 145,000 in their correctional system. I wouldn't want to model any. I wouldn't want to model Oklahoma after any state, but I don't mind poaching ideas that work. So I'm about the business of visiting other correctional facilities around the state. Everyone is in a financial crunch. All those folks in Washington who says we have a robust economy, I don't know what kind of Kool-Aid they're drinking from, but it's not my brand of Kool-Aid, I'll tell you that. But I do rely upon Texas for guidance, only to the extent that I have a lot of very close relationships with those folks in TDCJ. They have programs that work. We just need to pick and choose what we can afford to bring to Oklahoma. And I'm not talking about the entire system, but we've got to get back to a point where we make enough room for our programs to be offered to all inmates, regardless of where they are in the system. Right now, we're very limited on programs because they tend to gravitate to the bigger facilities because there's a little more room. The smaller facilities, the halfway houses, the work release centers, even some of the community centers, they have no chance at programs, and yet they have 1,500, 2,000 days left on their term, and they're not getting anything to prepare them to rejoin society. I dislike that intensely. We should be training these folks to rejoin society and be productive members. The only thing that is probably inhibiting us from doing that is if having the money and the personnel to hire to operate those programs for them to be successful. What the department has done for years and years, when there's a budget shortfall or a crunch, we've balanced the DOC budget on the back of FTEs. In other words, we don't hire back critical slots. We don't, if there are vacancies, we freeze those vacancies and never hire them back. So in essence, an agency that 53% of our budget is in payroll and employee packages, after a while, you're not only cutting the fat, the meat, you're into the marrow of the bone. And that's essentially where the department is today. We have cut to a point where we really can't cut any longer. I had an agency ask me some questions. Can you do another 5? Can you do another 12 or even 20%? No, we can't. We can't do that anymore. Otherwise, folks can come and tell me which one we're going to let loose and which one we're going to keep. It's just a horrible situation. We're all in a situation where we're between a rock and a hard spot.
We'll take one final question.
Tim Farley with Red Dirt Report. You mentioned criminal justice reform. You mentioned low-level drug offenders that are in prisons and ways to reduce the prison population. What are your thoughts on legalization of marijuana in the state of Oklahoma?
I am for the medicinal use of marijuana. I am not for the recreational use of marijuana. I have seen enough studies, whether it's PTSD or epilepsy or a ton of other illnesses, that that the effects of medicinal marijuana, which is it is marijuana ground into a powder, into a capsule, and it removes the hallucinogenic component of marijuana, which is called THC. You remove that, then it enables itself to attach to the areas where the nerve pain is occurring, or it interrupts the brain waves that causes seizures. I think that's worth exploring, but for recreational use, I am dead set against that.
Director, just a couple of quick questions. Do you think
Yes, no, and maybe.
Do you think the system is humane?
Yes, I do think the system is humane as it possibly can be. I know that we, even before I showed up, it's institutionalized that correctional officers develop a rapport with the inmates, and that's the way it should be. You're in close quarters, and you need to have that rapport. That's also has a beneficial component to it of gaining good intel on gangs and contraband and all other things. But you're not going to be so buddy-buddy with these folks that you're going to want to have them over for chicken fried steak at your house. That's not the kind of relationship we want. And I do understand that there are some correctional officers who don't feel that they're treated properly by the population. Actually, it's a two-way street. They are our guests, and we need to take care of them the best way that we possibly can, whether it's clothing, food, medicine, making sure they're treated well. Probably one of our stumbling blocks is with caseworkers. The caseworkers have so many people that they have to deal with that they can't see everybody in a timely fashion. We need to hire more caseworkers if we're going to cram more people into the prisons. It's just a fact of life. The numbers don't lie. But I think we do treat folks humanely. There's always a few bad apples in every barrel. It's another reason that I visit the yards and walk the yards by myself, so I can get a sense, and I interact with the inmates. Some people, most of the population, male and female, are willing to have a conversation with me. They always have good questions. They are not a bunch of dummies. I can guarantee you that. But I do think we're treating them humanely.
And finally, every agency at the state level is pointing to a crisis situation.
Right.
You're one more agency.
Right.
Pleading for additional funding. Where are you going to get extra money to make these changes and reforms? Is anyone floating any creative ideas to bring money to the corrections department and our high incarceration rates in Oklahoma?
Well, that's going to require a collective effort and an approach to the legislature next session on criminal justice reform. So, but insofar as creative ideas, I think we're working on one right now. And the board gave us permission to explore that further, and I believe we'll have something to roll out for the public, for the agency workers and agency employees, I should say, and for everyone to digest, because it has to be a plan that's revenue neutral, because there is no way I can go back to the legislature and ask for any more money. It's just not feasible. So the 11.5 we're having to shore up. We're making gains on cutting in areas that we believe are not all that of a high priority, but we are taking care of the fundamentals, and we're ensuring public safety. That's our job. We are 24/7, 365. And the men and women on the line as correctional officers, they are the first line of defense when it comes to public safety. And that is our goal. That is our job.
Thanks for joining us. Please give Director Allbaugh a hand.
Thank you.